Good afternoon, everyone. We're just getting ready for the next session to begin. Thank you for taking your seats.
Yeah. Oh God, this is going to be... There's not a lot of people. I mean, but to be honest with you, the worst time. Until 6:15.
There should be another guy. Sandra will not make.
No worries, hold on. Let me see if I can get it.
Exactly, but that person is not here.
Yeah, it's true.
I'll leave it there and I'll collect them afterwards.
I don't know who else is coming this panel. Andy, can I ask a really stupid question?
Yeah.
It's a very stupid question.
A whole bunch of people. Why is that? What's the context?
No, there's no context. It's a question.
Yeah, it's a whole lot.
Yeah. I think maybe reassess that. Please come closer. No. It's exactly here, yeah. Yeah, I know, right?
Test. Yes, it works. So good afternoon, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session hosted by ISO, the International Standardization Organization, at COP27. Welcome to you here in Sharm el-Sheikh, and welcome to everybody who is connected online. My name is Christoph Winterhalter. I'm the CEO of DIN, the German national standards body, and in my capacity as ISO Vice President Policy, I have the privilege to guide you through this session today. Our topic is transforming the climate action of global economies through standards, from commitment to impact. And I cannot remember having seen more people talking about the urgency of getting started with the implementation of climate commitment and policies, and the need for guidelines and standards that will help us in the practical deployment, like here at COP27. A lot of people talk about standards, but we lack a basic understanding how standardization works. So I mean, standards, how we understand them, are indeed a very important tool for the implementation of policies and regulatory requirements by involving all different stakeholder groups, from industry, academia, and civil society. In the process of standards development, we ensure that all voices are being heard in the consensus building process, leading to standards that are meeting market needs, are accepted globally, and ready for practical implementation. And that's what we need. We need to get ready for the practical implementation. But the good news is, we don't need to start from scratch developing a high number of new standards or reinvent a transparent and inclusive standardization process. This process exists as part of a global quality infrastructure based on close to 25,000 ISO standards that are supporting climate action already today, where they are being adopted and used. We have given us a target for this COP since we are here the first time ever. We want to ensure that our climate commitment is transformed into effective actions inspired and supported by our international standards. ISO and its members in 167 countries are active contributors to the implementation of international and national policies on climate action priorities. And ISO creates partnerships, and that's why we are here, to find the right partners that advocate for international standards for climate action, evaluate their impact together with us, improve existing standards, and inspire new ones by utilizing our network of more than 100,000 experts. And all this has been started by a London declaration that was signed more than a year ago, when we first said we want to make sure that in all our standards development projects, we actively consider the latest climate science and the associated transitions in the development of all new and all revised international standards and publication. And that includes the facilitation of the involvement of civil society and those most vulnerable to climate change in their development of international standards and publications. But let me now introduce our panelists. It's not just the two of us. So we have here in Sharm el-Sheikh, besides myself, and I'm very proud that you're here, Roberta Boscolo. She's the lead of climate and energy in the World Meteorological Organization, WNO. And we have connected online, and I think they are really connected online. We have Abeer Sadek, who is the Technical and International Cooperation Director at the Egyptian Organization for Standards and Quality. Then we have Ann Howard, who is from ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and she's the Senior Director of the National Accreditation Board in the US. And last but not least, we have Fabienne Michaux. She's the Director of the United Nations Development Program, responsible for the flagship initiative, the SDG Impact. And to give everybody that we have on our panel the possibilities to introduce themselves, and especially the role that they are playing, I would like to know, and that is my first question to you, Roberta. So what is the role, what is your role at the World Meteorological Organization, and how does the WMO help to convert and mainstream commitments for a measurable positive climate impact?
Thank you very much, Christoph. And so first of all, I just want to say what the World Meteorological Organization is. It's based in Geneva headquarters, and it's a specialized... Sorry, closer? It is a specialized agency of the UN family, an authoritative voice for weather, water, and climate. So we, for the point of view of the climate, first of all, we raise awareness of the climate change. We have reports that we issue every year, the State of Climate report, and there was the one at the beginning of this COP on this preliminary of 2022. We look at trends of several climate indicators, like the concentration of greenhouse gases, the temperature average, the sea level rise, the extreme events, and with this kind of information, we really, set the scene for the negotiation here in the COP, but also, it's meant to be an awareness tool of people say risks arising for climate change are becoming more and more extremes. And we also have a regional state of climate reports covering the whole world. We just issued this morning the regional state of climate in Asia and Pacific. And as I said, this kind of information are for raising awareness, but we also want to, with our information, to close the gap between climate information and action, climate information and knowledge to climate action. And this is how, the methodology that we have developed to be able to have climate knowledge to guide the climate action. And the starting point when we talk about guiding the climate action is always the identification of the focus of the action and what is the need and the requirement of this the requirement of this focus. And I'm talking about in terms of sectors. We need to differentiate what kind of sector we are looking for. Is transport, is buildings, is infrastructure or ecosystems, and also the region where it is this focus, because every region are affected in a different way of climate change. And because we need data that are highly localized, those climatic indicator has to be, so we need to understand the impacts of the climate change in this selected focus of our actions. For example, if we look at buildings, we need to look at the temperature, for example, of the water availability, and perhaps solar radiation if we want to have the electricity which is renewable, sea level rise if the building is going to be close to the coast, and it's important to know what kind of highly impact events are happening in that region, the exposure of our action, our focus of action to the climate extreme events. It's important to look at the historical data to understand what are the risks, or actually the current risk, but it's also important to look at the future climate change. Climate change is changing, and therefore looking at the past is like to drive looking at the rear mirror. So we need to use the data which are the projection, climate projection or climate prediction. And again, all these data need to be contextualized, and there are non-climatic effect, non-climatic information that need to be included in our analysis for climate information, for climate action, because some of these non-climatic data could compound with climate impacts and have either increase or decrease the impact itself. For example, the population density, critical infrastructure, land use, all need to be considered and to derive the vulnerability and the exposure of our sector, of our action. For example, for water availability, population is important, tourism and water management are important to consider, because these elements, as I said, could create more stress and add to the climate impact. And finally, the selection of the climate action has to improve resilience and adaptation or mitigation. The action need to be adequate, so it has to lessen the risk, reduce the vulnerability, need to be feasible, so implementable in the ground, and also cost effective. For this, WMO has already developed some resources. We have a platform for climate information, especially with the past, as I said, past, present, and future data, as well as we have statistical tools to understand the high impact events in a specific location. And this is the methodology that I think is important to understand and maybe apply when we want to develop standards that are, increasing supporting climate action. And I think the benefit for this is that we can increase the capacity in the countries, enhance local and global assessment, select the best action, which are transformable action, promote effective implementation, and also mobilize resources.
Thank you very much, Roberta. So that was pretty clear, and that is very good information that you provide that we can actually utilize in the development of standards, in the, let's say, the modification of existing standards to adapt to climate change. So very good. If I can bring you in as a virtual panelist, Abeer. Good afternoon. Which role does the Egyptian Organization for Standards and Quality play when it comes to supporting local climate action? You're on mute, I think.
Okay, it's okay right now?
Perfect, now we can hear you.
Okay. In Egyptian Organization for Standardization, we have a big history since we are established at 1957, and in the same year we joined ISO as the Egyptian national standard body, and currently, according to be aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and also with the 2030 Egyptian vision for sustainable development, we deliver a bundle of standards in different areas that related to changing climate knowledge and the climate information into action to delivering it to our clients from industry and different stakeholders and different business community sectors. In the meanwhile, I'd like to highlight some of our products in this area, where we develop a bundle of standards in the area of efficient use of resources like energy, water, and also in the area of renewable energy, where we develop a bundle of standards in solar heating industry, solar heating quality requirements, solar heating cells and power stations, and also we design in collaboration with the vocational and vocational training and education center a guideline for installation and maintenance of solar heating cells, that is to maximize the impact and the generation of energy result from solar heating. Also, we deliver some standards in recycling in collaboration with Housing and Building Institute in Egypt. We deliver more than 20 standards in recycling and reuse of building waste, building and construction waste in either paving roads or in the infrastructure of bridges and something like that. In the area of water efficient use, we deliver the requirements for water efficiency in the sanitary devices and tapes and showers and some in these devices. And also we deliver some national standards in the area of alternatives of current refrigerants, which is HCFCs, and you know the bad impact of HCFCs on the ozone layer. So collaborate with our colleagues in ozone unit in Environmental Affairs Agency in Egypt to deliver national standards, of course harmonized with the international ones, in designing the requirements, quality requirements and safety requirements, storage requirements, transportation requirements for alternative refrigerants to those of HCFCs. In the meanwhile, we have some contributions to the activity of conformity assessment. While we in Egypt have a subsidiary activity as a product certification body, working in some industrial sector, and finally we get accreditation as a product certification body. So we are assigned to affix energy efficiency label on the electrical devices. That is to declare their level of energy consumption. Also, we have a training center which is accredited according to this ISO standard for the accreditation of education and the training institutes. Through this training center, we deliver multiple programs for the industrial community and different stakeholders in the different fields related to implementing international standards, ISO ISO 50000, energy management system, environmental management system, health and safety management system, and also we make some kind of partnership with development partners like UNIDO in Egypt in designing tailored guideline for implementing energy management system in the industrial manufacturing establishments, which are classified as high intensive consuming energy sector. That is to set down the guideline to implement this management system, and also we participate in the implementation process via training of trainers and having a national trainers who could help the industry in setting their baseline of consumption and in calculating the energy savings that they achieve after implementing this international standard. The matter that help in highlighting the importance of not just participating in the development of international standards as national standard body, and also to develop the standards, but also to help the industry. Implementation of this international standard is the core, is the pathway to assess the core value of these standards and its impact as a climate action tool.
Thank you very much, Abeer. And you introduced two keywords. One was conformity assessment, and the second one was accreditation, to really understand that the standard itself doesn't really help us to develop a quality infrastructure, which is probably a good time to introduce you, N. And I mean, looking at your role at ANSI, at the National Accreditation Board, so how does that support the implementation of climate actions, building on what we heard from Abeer regarding conformity assessment?
Great, thanks so much, and thanks Abeer for introducing conformity assessment into the conversation today. Just to start, I'll give you a quick introduction of International Accreditation Forum. IAF is a worldwide association of accreditation bodies, and accreditation bodies are overseeing the work of third-party conformity assessment bodies in a variety of different fields. Its primary function is to develop a single worldwide program of conformity assessment, which reduces risk for businesses and their customers by assuring them that accredited conformity assessment activities can be relied upon. Our role as an AB, or accreditation body, in the role of GHG, or greenhouse gas management, is to ensure the competence of third-party validation and verification bodies. And these VVBs, as we call them, they're called DOEs under the UNFCCC system, are involved in a wide variety of climate change disclosure programs. In this role, ISO standards, here speaking primarily of the ISO 14064 series, for assessing, validating, and verifying greenhouse gas emissions. And these standards apply the principle that in order to control an activity, we first need to accurately measure it. That's what Abeer was getting at as well. They help to establish international best practice for VVB, validation verification body competence, impartiality, and they set about a rigorous validation and verification process that's transparent to its stakeholders and intended users. Programs relying on this infrastructure continue to grow and include national, subnational, and local stakeholders. Having this infrastructure, which is built on common standards, helps us all speak the same language and understand and apply the same basic principles and processes across programs. This is critically important as we continue to see a huge growth in the amount of disclosure programs. And at IEF, we have over 40 accreditation bodies now accrediting validation and verification bodies, and this number continues to grow. This represents a global assurance infrastructure of over 200 validation and verification bodies who are accredited to the same standards, overseen by accreditation bodies who are subject to peer review. But ABs and standards developers aren't the only piece of the puzzle. It takes a partnership to make these systems effective, and there are several stakeholders that are important to make the system operate effectively. This includes not only accreditation bodies and conformity assessment bodies and standards developers, but it also is crucial to have the input of our stakeholders, our program operators, our policymakers, and our regulators have to be at the table. So just to sort of summarize, as a user of these standards, what I see as the necessary elements of these systems is, one, they allow for some flexibility. So this is very important when we consider the needs of intended users. We have to consider trade-offs and local conditions. This is really critical to provide a common platform, but allow that flexibility so it can be adapted to meet the needs of the intended users. Also, it's important that the standards and the system aligns well with other systems, other standards, and it also needs to do this while providing some level of rigor at the measurement and reporting level. Also, they have to be transparent, and this means not only in how the standards are developed, but also on the disclosure side of things. We have to be very careful and very clear in how we describe the reporting boundaries, exclusions, and risks. And I want to underline here something that I think the standard, in particular 14643, is very strong at, is the important principle of professional skepticism when it comes to offering an opinion. This is really important in, being transparent in terms of what can be assured and what can be confirmed. Yeah, I think I'll end it there and pass it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, and that gives us a good impression of how big the system is that consists of standards and conformity assessment, that we're kind of offering the community to use it in order to bring the climate commitments to real implementation. But I think, Fabienne, if you bring you into discussion, you work for the flagship initiative for the SDGs within the UNDP. So how does that initiative help to convert commitments into a positive climate impact?
Thanks, Christoph, and lovely to be with you all. Welcome to my study at 2:20 a.m. in Melbourne time. I guess what we're doing is a little bit different and at a different level, because we're really looking at this challenge from a overarching decision-making framework perspective, and from the perspective of the SDGs, in that the SDGs is a framework, for the world in terms of the economic, social, and environmental impacts and outcomes that we need to achieve for our common prosperity going forward, and recognising that they're interdependent and closely related. And I think when we think about climate goals in particular, the need to actually deal with some of the social and economic issues to ensure that we can achieve the climate goals. That if we forget about those and have too myopic a view on the climate goals alone, that will actually fail in achieving or giving ourselves the best chance of achieving our collective climate goals. So SDG Impact was established 3.5 years ago as a global initiative sponsored by the administrator at the time, and it's now housed in UNDP's Sustainable Finance Hub, and very much from the recognition that to achieve the SDGs we need all actors in the system working together, and that the private sector has a really pivotal role to play. And historically UNDP has been more in the space, I guess, in terms of government and policymakers, and working through direct development and donor funding mechanisms to deliver outcomes on the ground. And this was very much a move, a deliberate move to actually look at ways that we could contribute to helping to align and leverage all capital in the system towards sustainability and achievement of the SDGs. So the way we're going about that is through two main streams of work, a market intelligence stream of work where we're really highlighting areas that are investable today in developing market contexts aligned with SDG need in developing markets. But probably for this discussion more relevant is the work we're doing on the impact, managing for impact side. So developing education and training standards and an assurance framework based on the standards, very much focused on how we can help organisations, so businesses and investors, on their sustainability journeys to embed sustainability, the SDGs and managing for impact at the core of organisational purpose and decision making, and really recognise that, given where we are in this moment of time and where we're heading, that increasingly sustainability is going to be central to future business prosperity and resilience. And, we need it to become much more move from being an add-on to what business gets done to really being integral and central to how business gets done. So the standards are internal management standards. They're not reporting or performance standards. They're very much focused on the practice side and that overarching framework to drive decision making. We based it on existing principles frameworks that were in place. So they align with those and don't compete or, are interoperable with those principles frameworks, but go that next level to help make those principle frameworks actionable and also bring actors in the system together around a shared language and approach. So, we've got 3 sets of standards we've developed under the SDG Impact banner for enterprises, private equity funds and bond issuers. And we've also worked with OECD to develop a 4th set of standards that's focused on DAC members and their relationships with development capital providers and their private sector partners for financing sustainable development. So, bringing different pools of capital together in a way that they can work collaboratively towards shared solutions. And one of the things that we also focused on with the development of the standards was what was missing from the principles frameworks that was potentially undermining progress progress towards sustainability and the SDGs, and in particular around taking a more holistic view and integrating into strategy as well as into governance were two areas that I think the standards have added additional value. So the standards have been developed to be quite aspirational. What we've really started with is that we're not on a sustainable path and we're a long way from achieving the SDGs, and we wanted to really provide that North Star in terms of how practice and decision making needs to change for us to put ourselves on a more sustainable trajectory. But realising that, and that they are aspirational, the development of the assurance framework that's aligned with the standards is more around setting a credible bar and encouraging people onto that journey, because assurance, as we've heard, is just so important in terms of supporting market trust and credibility, confidence, countering the cynicism we have around impact washing, etc. It's fundamental in terms of the quality piece, but that will be set at a lower level with an expectation that with each follow-up assurance, organisations need to demonstrate significant progress towards embedding best practice in line with the standards over time. So really trying to, again, from a theory of change perspective, lift up and then pull everybody along in terms of improving practice over time so that we can become more sustainable. The other thing that I think is important to mention about the philosophy in the standards is that we're not just focused on sustainable finance or or instruments or a part of what organisations are doing. We're really taking a view that all capital in the system and activity in the private sector needs to become more sustainable. And alongside that, we need a specific focus on very targeted solutions to close the SDG financing or funding gap and achievement of the SDGs themselves, so that OECD number of around 3.7 trillion US annually that needs to be filled, and that's where we see the opportunity to come together around blended finance models. In the standards, the focus on looking and re-examining business models, partnerships and collaborations. How can we do things differently to reach into those underserved and unserved markets to lift that up so that we end up on a more sustainable trajectory. A little bit like Anne mentioned, part of our focus is also around capacity building and how do we build the community of practice in this area. So with the standards, we're also in the process of rolling out at the moment a Train the Trainer program so that we can train external market trainers. They're often consultants that are working with companies as well. So actually, building this philosophy amongst a broader group of organisations and working with them to build the community of practice over time. And we'll do the same on the assurance side as well, looking to, we're currently designing the Assura training program at the moment, and we'll take the same approach there to, to hopefully, create a bigger community of organisations that are serving this space in a credible way. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Fabienne. And I heard two important kind of aspects that you brought into the discussion. One was about sustainable finance, or the topic of kind of having measurable criteria to raise funds, to redirect the money, and to kind of raise capital for the important projects. I mean, what I hear in Sharm el-Sheikh is a lot about how to redirect money, how to make sure that we invest in the right project. But the question is, what are the right projects? How do we find the right project, and what are the criteria? And then we are back to standards. And I think there's a lot of activities ongoing regarding sustainable finance, green finance. What are kind of non-financial reporting measures that we need to have, that needs to be the base to redirect those funds in the right direction. So that was one thing. And then you talked about capacity building. And I think that really cries for more partnerships, that we don't do double work, that we work together, that we are aligning our activities, and that it kind of starts the second round of question. It's about to find out how good are we in partnering today, where there is room for improvement, and what do you kind of envision of being the next step in working together with ISO, to be very precise. And I mean, if I'm going to start with you again, Roberta, I think being a climate scientist, you have the knowledge that will now be needed in many of our technical committees when revising the standards. So what has been your experience so far with the standardization organization like ISO?
We in WMO have been working with the guidelines of ISO for quality standards of quality management, especially for services, meteorological services for aviation. And it's been working very well because it provides our institutions that reports, say, to WMO, which is the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services, to be accredited for quality management excellence and tools, and according to the principle of the quality management. We are going to expand this also for climate information and climate services according to, as I explained before, using the full value chain of climate services and the development, so that our MET services can provide these services, and they are accredited as according to the standards of quality management and the guidelines of ISO. So the vision is part of the Global Framework for Climate Services, and is one of the elements for developing this framework globally. And what we are going to do is to synthesize our climatological standards, also synthesize the ISO templates, and set up an internal and external audit. We already performed some training. My colleague here, who is in the first row, is actually the responsible for these activities. And I do think that more need to be done and in WMO to connect with ISO, but in a kind of exchange way. So ISO helping us to provide better tools, quality, and accredit our MET services to support, for example, net zero activities, net zero actions, and adaptation and mitigation, as well as for us to provide our knowledge and our data to develop these templates and these guidelines, and also to help ISO to evaluate these guidelines and restart, the cycle, because this is a cycle really, it's not a chain of improving and develop new ones, as you said in the beginning, to have more, also to provide a push to innovation.
Sounds like a win-win situation. So let's continue and expand the cooperation. But if I start in a different order and go back to you, Fabienne, can you share with us an example of a successful collaboration with the standardization organization, for example, especially in the area of sustainable finance?
Thanks, Christoph. So interestingly, the work that we've been doing actually grew out of UNDP's involvement in the impact management project structured network of standard setters in the sustainability impact space. So that's a group of organisations and people that have now been working together and maintaining that connection over a number of years. It was originally auspiced by Bridges, and that came to an end a year ago. Actually, immediately before this call, we had our 1-year anniversary of the transition from impact management project to impact management platform, which has basically kept the same group of standard setters together. And that's been a really, a really beneficial platform to also enable, bilateral and other relationships to form for collaboration. So a couple of areas that I think are standouts for me in this development process is, firstly, as I mentioned before, the collaboration with the OECD DAC on the development of the OECD UNDP impact standards for financing sustainable development. Very snappy title, which were being developed by the DAC while we were in development of the SDG impact standards, and we came together to really manage that process collectively and collaboratively together to create basically an umbrella for all of the standards so that they were very complementary and interoperable from the start. And that's been a fantastic partnership and relationship, and is ongoing, and we're really, I count that as probably one of the highlights that we've managed to achieve. I figure, with UNDP for the developing world and OECD for the developed world, we can achieve our collective goal of global domination, not necessarily for our organisations, but for greater good in terms of impact and achieving our collective goals for climate and the SDGs. The other partnership is another member of that group called Social Value International, and they have a series of principles and standards around stakeholder involvement in decision making and valuing what matters. And when we were developing the standards, I felt that was really good work, and actually took a different approach in the development of the SDG impact standards so that we weren't duplicating what was already there. So our work in terms of the development of the standards really leaned on their work. And then interestingly, once our standards were released, SVI were looking at making some updates and changes to their standards, and actually released a new standard after many years, Principle 8 on Be Responsive, and actually it worked back the other way where they really leaned on the work we'd done. So I think that by having those relationships and ongoing interactions and knowing what each other's doing, it naturally creates the environment that enables convergence over time and interoperability over time. So I think that they're really, they're really positive examples of collaboration. And then, more broadly, we're dealing with other members now that we're moving from development into driving awareness and adoption. We're talking with other members of that group around, their frameworks and tools, and can we work together so that we fully understand, where their tools fit and how we can explain that when we're doing training on the standards, and show, for instance, with banks, how do you take the UNFFI, amazing suite of tools, like Impact Radar and other tools that they have, how do you use those tools to really implement the standards and bring that to life? And, other organisations, obviously, like GRI, etc.
Excellent, Fabienne. Very encouraging. And Abeer, we heard some examples already from you, but representing a national member body of ISO, do you have some best practice example from partnerships that you would like to share with us in addition to what we heard so far?
Yeah, as one of the national standards body member in the ISO, and specifically DEFCO committee, we partnering with some colleagues from the other national standards body through a twinning program conducted from 2014 till 2017 with a consortium of a national standard body who are BSI, AFNOR and INOR. We collaborate together to share experience and to twin in the area of institutional capacity building in standardization, as is our core function. That is to apply the good standardization practice in the different scopes that we tackle. And also there is other slots in this program, that is to enhance capacity building of EOS conformity assessment unit to be accredited, and also to support other industrial institutes to apply life cycle assessment in standards in water, and also in calculating their carbon footprint, and also for applying energy management system international standards. Also, we have some kind of collaboration with at the regional level with the ARSO, which is the African Republic Standardization Organization, where we are a member in the board, and also we are one of the African countries who are engaged in the implementation of African Continental Free Trade Area, where that the unified regional standards will be the technical measure to to facilitate trade within the AFCAFTA region. And also in this area, there is the contribution of EOS in the standardization work either at the regional level, according to our membership in ARSO and ETSMO, Arab Organization for Standardization and Metrology, and also for the SMIC membership, and all of those regional level contribution support and hone our capacity whenever it comes into collaboration in the development of international standards. And recently we are thinking about delivering a new work item proposal to one of the committees in ISO to make some kind of standards, set down the requirements for eco-labeling of standards that are produced with minimized hazards material content, setting limit for maximum residual limits accepted from any hazardous materials or heavy metals, and also those that their production process result in minimized emissions. Back to my colleague Fabienne in her talk about the financial support for implementing standards. I urge both UNDP, ISO, and all the financial donors or financial supportive institutes to help the developing countries in just exposing the international best practice in delivering, in developing, and in implementing the climate-related standards in their business, specifically those of small-sized business, small and medium enterprises. They will count and rely a lot on the national standards body to work with and to expose them to these portals of financial supports or capacity building institutes, and of course in collaboration with the capacity building programs and initiatives that ISO tackle, I think we will rely a lot of deliverables that could be exposed to the world by COP28 in Emirates.
No, very good feedback. And I think we learned that we need to expand our network. We have a strong network, so we're helping each other within the ISO system. I mean, we heard about the climate scientists being willing to work with us with a win-win situation. We got good examples from a UN organization that's really pushing in the direction of SDGs, saying how can we work with standardization organization? And I think a natural partner of a standardization organization is a conformity assessment organization. So I mean, if I turn last but not least to you, Anne, as a member of a national accreditation board, I mean, how important is an established quality infrastructure, including conformity assessment from a user point of view? I mean, just that everybody understands how important this network is and how it works.
Well, again, I think I would underscore the importance of taking into consideration the needs of the intended user of the system. And it was previously mentioned by Fabienne that some of these things are a little bit more difficult to measure. When we talk about environmental, social governance issues and things like that, I think we need to have more of a dialogue about what type of assurance is appropriate and what can actually be provided to add value. Because just saying something can be, verified, doesn't necessarily mean that can meet the actual level that's prescribed in a measurement standard. So we have to be sensitive to that. And I think we'll see a lot more, hopefully, dialogue on that over the next year. Just to give some examples where these frameworks have been sort of picked up and used in terms of providing targeted technical assistance and capacity building. One example would be the ICAO CORSIA program for international commercial aviation. They've developed the CORSIA, they call them buddy partnerships, where they offer targeted technical assistance to countries implementing CORSIA. They've partnered with IAF on capacity building, and we have a global MLA now for verification of airline emission assertions under that program. And so that's all working together to provide the standards, right, the conformity assessment, and then also the feedback And that's really critical, is getting feedback on how these systems are actually working. You know, what's going wrong, what needs to be fixed, where do we have a piece of a standard that maybe isn't working as it should for the needs of that system. So the core of, you know, really getting at how do we continually improve to get the kinds of results that we want to see. I mean, there are so many other examples too. You know, Vera is another voluntary framework that's using the ISO standards. Canada has a federal price on carbon, and they're relying on the ISO framework of standards to support a variety of regulatory initiatives to reduce their emissions, and a variety of new programs that do take into consideration, you know, social factors such as you know, global jurisdictional RED+. So the list goes on and on. I do think that as we see more and more programs, it is really good to get these programs together and collaborate on trying to harmonize some of the things that are more high level, and trying to get those pieces harmonized so that we don't have a lot of core differences.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, align things and think about the practical implementation. I mean, we want to get things, let's say, implemented on the ground. And I mean, a standard is not useful if it's not going to be used. And if the usability is bad, it's not going to be applied correctly. So having this information, the feedback from the users of standards embedded in our committees will be essential, especially if we embark in a different direction. But I mean, I would like to get your feedback on one aspect. I mean, international standardization, as we know it, is based on a public-private partnership that requires a strong private sector engagement in providing experts that are actually driving the development and enhancement of the international standards, which we need actually now. And how can we, from your perspective, motivate the private sector, companies sending their experts or focusing on particular things in the standardization that we need in order to shift the priorities towards climate action? Maybe we can start with you, Abeer. I mean, what is your experience? Kind of how can we motivate experts from the private sector to engage in standardization, and how to focus their time on these climate relevant aspects in standards?
Okay. When private sector assess the impact of implementing standards in terms of cost reduction, in terms of high efficiency in using resources, in terms of the ability and the capacity to enter new markets and to declare the new perspectives of their production, at this moment they are well engaged with the standardization process. And also the good examples that I have is the experience built through the implementation of some project that engages the Trade Support Institute and trade promotion organizations, where they explored the benefits of using standards in declaring conformity with the requirements of different markets, and of course with the requirements of the new perspectives while thinking about climate work and climate action. And at the same time, we in EOS will focus in the near future to adapt the standardization development process to integrate the climate action perspective as per the ISO Guide 84 recently delivered 2 years ago. And we'll try to accompany ISO while upgrading their standards in the same slot and in the same mainstream, whereby when thinking about delivering a new standard or developing standards for taking the demand of a specific sector, whenever we ignore the climate action and the climate related activities that we had to tackle in the sector, I think we will miss a lot. We think that we could make some kind of request to the capacity building unit to make additional focus with the US standardization staff to be able and to be acquainted with how to merge their good standardization practice to be in line with the ISO Guide 84 to tackle and integrate the climate action work in every standards while developing these standards, and also to engage and to help our stakeholders to be acquainted with the same approach. And I think there will be, at this moment, they will be able to assess the importance of calculating their baseline of emissions to try to have a capacity or capacity belt in the area of calculating emissions in verification of the calculations. That is to be able to declare their products as green ones and to expose to the world the efforts exerted in transition into a green business operation. I think this kind of equation will help in more engagement with the private sector, and I think the ISO as a capacity building initiative operators, and also with in collaboration with the donors, with scientific organizations, will do a lot in this consequence.
So what you said is, if I try to sum it up, is to support the NSBs in having the necessary resources to have a methodology that they can use to educate their experts, making the lives of the experts easier to take it from them, but on the other hand, provide evidence that there is a market need, so that things are moving, which is a strong signal coming here from COP27. Things will be required in the market. So there is a market need, so better try to implement the necessary standards and develop the necessary requirements into standards that they can be used. And of course, one lever could also be the capital markets that will soon demand to get reporting about some non-financial figures that are related to climate. And then we are back to you, Fabienne. What do you see as the key driver that motivates the private sector to engage in standardization activities, to look into how can we develop standards that are more climate friendly, even if their implementation means a change in production, a change in technology at their own organization at home?
Well, I think increasingly, the awareness that this is now, not a sustainability issue, it's a business issue, is getting there, right? We're getting to that point where, the convergence between the, societal needs and impact on business performance is coming into the line of sight for businesses to see that this is an issue. And I think we're seeing a lot of things that indicate that things are moving. So, we're starting to see, boards either voluntarily or through regulation become accountable or realise that they are accountable for including climate considerations into their decision making. So that is setting off a trail, which is often, a few years. That you have this realisation. The next year, you might develop a sustainability policy. The next year, you're starting to take that sustainability policy and weave it through the other policies, and then through your risk matrix and everything else. And I think we're seeing, countries at different stages and organisations at different stages on, of that trail. So I think in terms of engaging the private sector, as much as possible, including them in the process and helping them solve the challenges and the problems that they have, and the business challenges that they're trying to solve for now will be helpful. And I think we've had an interesting year where we've had some very visible exposures and risks of organisations from a reporting side, being held to account. So the lack of standardisation, is becoming a risk for organisations in terms of the information that they're providing publicly, and I think it will quite quickly turn on, where you often have a lot of resistance to standard setting, to actually realising that we need standard setting to manage risk and to reduce reporting and reputational risk. I think the big question is, how do we accelerate action? Because the pace of action is not fast enough in terms of achieving outcomes that any of us want to live with. Either in terms of future business performance, but also impact on our communities and our children's well-being in the future. So there I think we really need to also be looking for more leadership from governments to provide the enabling environment and the level playing field, so that the private sector has the certainty and knows what it needs to do. Because once that certainty is there, we know that the private sector can actually respond very quickly and adapt and start to make changes very quickly. And what we need now is more speed. I just wanted to touch on one of the things that Anne said around the data and sustainability information, and particularly once you get into the social areas being a bit more messy. And it's interesting because we were having this conversation at the Paris Peace Forum in a small group last week around the issue of certainty of information in this space, and whether or not whether we need a conversation as we start to move down this process, particularly with assurance, around a different approach around certainty of information, and maybe using lower certainty information with confidence levels rather than actually high certainty activity and output measures, which aren't good proxies for the results and outcomes we want to see. So, I thought it was interesting you raised that, because I think that is going to be one of the topics that we all need to sort of think about as we move down this assurance path. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And basically, what you said is having two approaches. One is the top-down approach, where governments are clearly serious about setting clear targets in the regulation that builds a reliable kind of target setting for the companies that they can rely on. So that's the top-down approach. On the other side, as you said, bring the topic to the committees and listen to the experts in the committee. What are their kind of challenges at home when it comes to fulfilling requirements from their customers? Having to report certain numbers that they don't know how to calculate them. So it's really the bottom up, making climate change an issue, a topic for discussion in the technical committees, and listening to the experts, what they need bottom up, but having clear requirements, a clear roadmap from the governments, setting targets and setting tougher targets in order to meet these important climate goals. But when it comes to kind of involving, again, bottom up the users to listen to the challenges they have in the companies, then I would like to go back to you, Anna, saying, are there any thoughts from your side how we can be more proactive in convincing the private sector and the experts to really focus on the topic of implementing climate action when it comes to revising existing standards?
Well, I think I'll add two things. First, it's already been said, but just to continue the drive for meaningful and transparent disclosure frameworks. We're seeing that here with the Securities Exchange Commission, corporate disclosure proposed rule. But then, actually looking at those requirements and seeing whether or not they're appropriate and feasible to carry out. And maybe we start out with, a lower level of assurance or reporting, and we build from there. Everything doesn't have to be coming out like Scope 3 emissions reporting, right? Everyone knows that's inherently complex and error prone. Maybe we don't have to start with the highest level of reporting and verification. Maybe we can start with a lower level. And then I'd also like to raise the issue of one of the complaints that we get is that the MRV process is slow, it's expensive, it takes a very long time, for example, for a project to get off the ground and actually get all the way to generating credits. So I have great hope that the private sector can help to develop more technical tools. I was able to sit in on some of the earlier presentations this week regarding the huge advances in satellite-based imagery for use in looking at, how to collect better data for forest degradation and forest deforestation. Types of data like that can be used by verifiers to reduce uncertainty. So those types of tools are really essential in scaling and in making things more efficient so that we can channel the finance quicker and more efficiently.
No, thanks a lot, Anne. And last but not least, if I turn to you, Roberta, we talked about how could you support to make it better visible for the experts what is going to happen on the climate and how it's going to affect them with their technology when we talk about climate adaptation. Any further thoughts of what you could bring to the table that we motivate the private sector and the experts to take this into consideration?
Yeah, no, I think my panelists actually really provide a lot of thoughts, and I don't know if I can say something more, but I just perhaps want to stress the important things of transparency and accountability, as I was said before. And we were supposed to have another panelist to talk about these 10 principles
yes.
for accountability and transparency that has been put forward thanks to the UN Secretary General. To avoid greenwashing, to avoid this lack of clarity and lack of real guidance and impact really at the end. So I think what can I say for me is that in this sense the private sector should have all the reason and the motivation to be part of this movement. I think greenwashing is not going to be tolerated anymore, and standards can be a very powerful way of pushing for climate action and a powerful way of developing policies for climate action. Of course, this data and the climate experts, we are stand ready to help. And especially for the capacity development, the trainings on understanding the data and the uncertainty, as Anne was putting forward, and what kind of data should be used for them to develop kind of actions.
No, thank you very much. It's getting dark here in Egypt, but we still have quite some people sitting here in the audience. If there is any question, we can we have 1, 2 questions, 3 questions. So let's take the 3 questions, and then I would like to sum up. Do we have a mic that we can share? Maybe you can say your name and which organization you're coming from, and if you have a question to one of the panelists, you can direct your question directly to the person you want to hear an answer about. I think the mic is not turned on yet.
Sorry, I'm an analog kind of person. So thank you. It's a question and a statement, really. The statement, first of all, a thank you, really. So first, I'd like to thank ISO for ISO 14093-2022, okay, which is a recently granted mechanism for financing local adaptation to climate change.
Welcome to the panel.
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick. Record. First, I'd like to thank ISO for ISO 14093-2022, which is a mechanism for financing local adaptation to climate change for performance-based climate resilient grants. So thank you very much indeed. And we're very grateful for this mechanism and for the ISO standard. And the question I'd like to ask is, how can we work with you to expand its knowledge of it, and what services does ISO provide once one gets an ISO? The beauty of this one is that we'll be able now to deploy this standard to national systems for using intergovernmental fiscal transfers for local governments at the local level, which adapts locally but report globally. And this is the standard which will enable that local adaptation but global reporting. But what comes next? How then does ISO help us kind of socialize that standard? What is the role of ISO when one gets a standard? That's my question. Thank you.
That's a very good question, and that really cries to, involving the national members, because it's the task of the national members to support in a national context how to implement the standards and make all the national stakeholders aware that the standard exists and how it's supposed to be used. Anything you would like to add, Abeer? Representing a national standards body.
Yes, as you mentioned, Christoph, we try to make the marketing and communication needed about the national standard levels, and also we try a lot to engage private sector and experts from different stakeholders while developing national standards, and of course while participating in the development of the international standard work. And I think both of those slots will help a lot in exposing the needed information about the implementation of those standards to the standard users. But at the same time, you know that sometimes some of the most critical technical-wise standards, like that the gentleman mentioned, which tackle some specific calculations, it need the standard body itself will ask you as ISO capacity building support and parent entity to support the national standards body, specifically in the developing countries, to be able to transmit this experience and or to design a guideline for the standard users to be well acquainted about how to use it, how to implement it in the proper way.
Thank you very much, Abeer. I hope that gives you an idea on what we can do and what we are committed to do. But thanks a lot for the question and your statement.
It does, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go for the second question, and then I would like to kind of close with some closing remarks.
Thank you, moderators, and thank you for great panelists. I understand standard is the basis for not only quality of the product, but also the basis of the societies, the qualities. In that sense, standards need stability, right? But the stability often kills the room for innovations. So how do you take a balance between the stability and keeping the room for innovation? That's my first question. And the second one is the nature-based solution based on local knowledge and indigenous knowledge is regarded as an option for mitigations and adaptations. But these solutions should be very difficult to standardize. So as ISO organizations, how do you try to cope with these challenges to invite local knowledge and the indigenous knowledge to standardization? Wow.
This is an excellent question. I could use another 90 minutes to elaborate on your question, but it's very important. I have a research background myself, and I think what we try to do with ISO standards, and in most cases, that is actually what happens. We don't describe a certain technology. We describe what to measure and what is relevant, and then leave room for technologies to evolve. And I think, what is the alternative to regulate things, because then you're describing how things are supposed to be implemented. While with standards, we can actually open up to integrate new technologies, and that's exactly what we need to do. When reviewing standards, are they open enough to provide the freedom to include the latest technology that will help us to be more climate friendly? So I think that has to be incorporated with the technical committees, and looking at somebody who is in our technical committees, that's exactly what we do. To be technology open, to be able to respond fast, but not necessarily having to modify the standard every single time. But thanks a lot for your question. If there's anything my dear panelists would like to add to answer that question, or if you kind of...
Christoph, yeah, we took exactly the same approach that, very much, getting that balance, which is sometimes an art form, to provide the stability and the robustness and the replicability of application and consistency of application, while at the same time sufficiently, what I call bounded flexibility to enable innovation, but also to enable local implementation and implementation in different contexts, because applying the same rules, rigid rules in different contexts does not actually improve consistency. We need to actually have flex in the standards so that we can achieve that consistency by actually being able to respond to different environments appropriately. So I think it's an excellent question. Yep. and really important. And I think the if I look to our standards it's the same with a number of ISO standards. It's very much around the decision-making process. So embedding, actually making sure that we're taking a broader view and that contextual information, and building innovation and collaboration partnerships into the decision-making process helps to achieve those outcomes as well, which are really important, because what got us here isn't going to get us to where we need to go to. Innovation's essential.
Basically, that was part of my summary, that these partnerships are so important, that we collaborate, to be flexible, to be future-proof. And I just want to reiterate that ISO and its members are committed to aligning international standards with climate action. We place climate action at the heart of the development and the revision of all standards, and actively work with you as partners to ensure that existing and new standards are climate aligned. I mean, we even have a climate change coordination committee that really makes sure that all the technical committees receive, let's say, the necessary support that this is actually happening. And I mean, it was been made clear that with our international framework of member organization in 167 countries with more than 100,000 experts, we are capable to build really effective and meaningful cross-sector partnerships to support the acceleration of climate action. And last but not least, I mean, the recently launched workshop agreement, and I need to mention it since one of our panelists was unable to kind of join us here on the panel, on the net zero guidelines, is a really very good starting point with reference to relevant standards from ISO and other organizations. I mean, to really get in touch with the topic, to work on it and work on implementation and use international standards to do so. So international standards provide a robust framework to assess risks related to potential impacts of climate change that we will get kind of to know from the climate experts, and of course to integrate adaptation within and across organization. And I would really finally like to thank all the panelists for their valuable contribution, and I think we had a good discussion, and all the participants who joined us here, even though it's getting late and getting dark, and most of all to all the participants online that have kind of listened to what we had to say. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bisu. Hi, B. Boss.